Welcome to the Story Corner. I'm Kesta, Chief Storyteller around here, and if you like a good book, you've come to the right place. Today, I am going to be reading to you from a new series by Candice Lemon-Scott. The first book in the series is called Pelican and Peril, and it was published last year. Here it is. It's illustrated beautifully on the front and back covers by Asker. There's the front cover. Have a look at the back cover. There you go. Aren't those illustrations great? I love the colours of the book too. The book itself isn't illustrated throughout the chapters, so the pictures are just at the beginning and the end. So if you are the sort of person that likes to sit back and listen with your eyes closed, feel free to do that. If you want to watch as I read along, then of course you're also welcome to do that. Before we get into the chapter itself though, I'm going to show you the end pages, because that's where the illustrations are. Then we have got, so that would have given you a little clue because you might have noticed some oil drums there. The next page, and Candice has dedicated this book to Gerda, who loves pelicans. And on this page, there's a little bit about the eco-rangers themselves, Jay and Ebony. So I'll read you their introductions. Meet the eco-rangers, it says. Ebony. Hi everyone, I'm Ebony. I'm 12 years old. I like spending time in nature, rescuing animals, or riding my bike to go off on an adventure. I'm super independent, but sometimes I jump right in without thinking, and that can get me into trouble. I love being an eco-ranger because I get to solve mysteries. So there's a little clue about what kind of books these are. Eco, rescue, mysteries, all sorts of interesting things. Jay's introduction says, I'm Jay, Ebony's best friend and next door neighbour. I'm 11 years old. I like making jokes and I have a bit of a sweet tooth, especially when it comes to cake. I also love nature and helping out at the wildlife hospital. Being an eco-ranger is so much fun because I can look after animals and make sure they're safe. Now, there is also a map page at the start which shows where Ebony and Jay live and where the wildlife hospital is, and basically the action that takes place in this book happens all around their town and the surrounds. So it's worth, if you get hold of a copy of this book and read it for yourself, to check back on the map every now and then to see where the action's happening. Right, you're sitting comfortably ready for the first chapter. Chapter 1. Loser buys lunch, Ebony cried with excitement. She jumped off her bike and raced down the sandy pathway towards the beach. Jay pulled his towel out of the milk crate that was strapped on the back of his bike. He pushed his glasses against his nose and chased after her. Ebony was in the lead as she reached the shoreline, breathing in the salty air. She raced along the water's edge, her messy brown hair blowing around her face. She could hear Jay puffing along behind her like a steam train. She glanced back, laughing, as his beach towel billowed out behind him like a parachute. Do we always have to race to the pier? He complained between breaths. Ebony and Jay had been next-door neighbours and best friends for as long as she could remember. He was fun to hang out with, and she could always beat him in a running race. Without slowing, Ebony glanced behind her again. The grin on her face vanished as she tripped and landed against something hard. Ouch! She stared at her tanned knee. She had grazed it, and it started stinging straight away. She looked down to see what she'd fallen on. It's a metal drum half buried in the sand, she thought. Maybe it's washed up from the sea. Jay ran past her, but Ebony wasn't out of the race yet. She picked herself up and took off again. I won! Ha! You have to buy me lunch now, cheered Jay, who had reached the pier first. Ebony caught up with Jay. He was bending over with his hands on his knees, like he'd just run a marathon. Then she looked up and saw something in the water. "Oh no," she cried. "What's that?" Jay stood up. "You mean the cruise ship?" The huge white liner sat anchored in the harbour. Ebony still couldn't get used to it turning up in their coast town every few weeks, since it had started touring several months ago. It brought in crowds of noisy tourists who didn't seem to notice the nature that was all around them. And there was always a queue at their favourite fish and chip shop now when they went there. The conservation centre had much more work to do now. Tourists often trampled the fragile grasses that kept the dunes intact and left rubbish on the beaches. Ever since the school holidays had started, Ebony and Jay had been helping out at the centre with beach clean-ups and tree planting. Now they were busier than ever. Ebony didn't mean the cruise ship, though. "Not that," she cried, and pointed at the black sludge forming a dark, greasy layer over the sea. What is it?" Jay said, grimacing. "I don't know, but we should tell the conservation centre," Ebony replied. "You're right," Jay agreed. "We have to get there straight away. Then we could have an early lunch," he said with a grin. "Do you ever think of anything other than your tummy?" Ebony smiled. "No, not really." He shrugged and rubbed his tummy through his oversized t-shirt. "We need to see what it looks like from the pier first and how far out that black water goes." Ebony made her way to the pier. She hoped they would know what that black stuff was at the centre. The sea had never looked like this before. When she got halfway down the wooden platform, she stopped at the steel steps to the pontoon. "I want to get closer," she said to Jay. Her friend nodded, and she made her way carefully down the slippery, wet stairs. Water lapped through the slits. She could see the dark smear more clearly now. It sat on top of the water. As Ebony reached the bottom of the pontoon, she noticed there was something lying in the corner. It was a black bundle. She stepped closer, and the shape moved. She screamed and leapt back in fright. Jay came running down the steps, his trainers clanking on the metal surface. Ebony stood with her hands clasped to her mouth. In front of her was a black feathered mound, like a big fluffy pillow. "What is that?" Jay cried. "I don't know. I thought it was a pile of rubbish and then it moved," Ebony said. The two friends edged closer to it. Ebony could now see long feathers. Big, solid wings were pressed against the creature's body. It was covered in sticky black gloop, the same colour as the sludge she'd seen in the sea. "It looks like a bird," Ebony said. She walked up to it slowly and carefully. She could see part of a long, peachy-coloured bill and one very large black eye staring straight at her. "It's a pelican," Ebony gasped. "Is it okay?" Jay asked. "I don't know. It hasn't moved much." She stepped in closer until she could almost reach out and touch the gigantic bird. Ebony had always thought pelicans were such interesting creatures. They looked a bit prehistoric, like something that belonged back in the time of the dinosaurs. She could see its big grey feet curled up under its feathers. It made her think of all the times she had seen pelicans gliding down to the water, their wings stretched wide. Their webbed feet would skim across the water, acting like brakes. This one was covered in thick, greasy black sludge, though. The bird smelt of petrol, like when her mum was filling up the car at the service station. Ebony reached out to touch the pelican, but it raised its great wings, knocking her sideways. Unhurt, Ebony stood back up and shook herself off. "What are we going to do with it?" Jay asked, edging closer to the gigantic bird to see if it was injured. It didn't move, but just as he got close enough to touch it, the pelican opened its wings and Jay stepped to the side, slipping on the edge of the jetty. "Careful!" Ebony cried. She reached out to grab him, but as she grasped Jay's towel, it slipped from his shoulders. "Help!" Jay yelled, falling into the water below. Ebony was left holding just his towel. She ran to the edge to see Jay paddling his arms in the water. He pushed himself forwards in his heavy clothes, grabbed his glasses that were slowly sinking beside him, then swam to the edge of the pontoon. He pulled himself up on the ladder. Ebony grabbed hold of his arm and helped pull her soggy friend up. He put his glasses back on, panting. She wrapped the towel around his shoulders. "Are you okay?" Ebony asked. "I guess," Jay gasped, blinking through his wet glasses. Seeing him completely soaked with his hair plastered to his head, Ebony started laughing. "That pelican's a menace," Jay said, making Ebony laugh even more. The pelican made a kind of crowing sound, like a rooster with a cold. "Did you hear that?" Ebony said. She moved closer again. The bird tried to stand but seemed too weak to push its large body up. It slumped back down. "I wish we had some food to give it. Anyone who gives me something to eat is my next best friend," Jay commented. "We don't have anything with us, though, unless you have a fish hiding in your pocket," Ebony smiled. "Only these. No good for birds," Jay replied, pulling out some lint-covered chocolates. He picked a few of them up and popped them into his mouth. "Ew!" Ebony cried. Jay shrugged and held out his hand. "What one?" Ebony shook her head and crouched down near the pelican. She looked into its huge black eyes, and the bird stared back at her. It was as though it was asking her for help, but she had no idea what to do. Standing, it would be nearly as tall as her. How were they going to rescue a bird of that size? "Stay still," Jay whispered. Ebony didn't move. The pelican stretched out its bill and rested it right on the sore spot where she'd grazed her knee. Ouch! Not a feather on its body moved, but it looked around as though taking everything in. Crouching in an uncomfortable position, Ebony was forced to move, startling the pelican so it lifted its bill off her leg again. It blinked its eyes and made a low sound so quiet she could barely hear it. "We have to get it to the wildlife hospital," she said. "And fast," Jay agreed. And that is the end of Chapter 1 of Pelican in Peril. I hope you've enjoyed it. It's a good read. It's quite exciting as the story goes on. There is a mystery to solve, so it's not just about rescuing the pelican, although that is a very important part. I think if you read this, you will fall in love with the pelican and certainly be interested in Jay and Ebony's adventures. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you find a copy of this at your local library or have a look for it at a bookshop or perhaps online. Happy reading. I will see you next time. Bye for now.